Marcus had barely finished moving his last box inside when he noticed her. A short, stiff-backed woman stood at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed, lips curled in obvious disgust. She made no attempt to hide her scrutiny, eyes flitting from his car to his clothes, then to his face. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, already sensing the type of interaction this was about to be dart. Karen did not introduce herself. Instead, she gestured vaguely at his house. "You live here?" Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow, still holding a box of books. "Yeah, just moved in." Karen let out a slow, exaggerated sigh, as if she had just heard the worst possible news. "Well," she said, voice dripping with disapproval, "I hope you keep the place presentable. Our homeowner association has very high standards." Marcus had met people like Karen before, self-important, entitled, and just a little too interested in controlling the world around them. He simply nodded and walked inside, deciding it was not worth engaging further, but Karen was not the type to let things go. By the end of his first week in the neighborhood, Marcus had already received 2 formal complaints from the homeowner association, both signed by Karen. The first accused him of having his trash cans out too long, despite the fact that every other house on the street had theirs in the exact same spot. The second claimed that his grass was too long. Even though Marcus had mowed it just 2 days prior, it was clear she was testing him, seeing how much of a nuisance she could be before he either snapped or packed up and left. When the homeowner association violations failed to rattle him, Karen escalated. She started calling the police. At first, it was minor things, claims of excessive noise, even though Marcus rarely played music and barely had any visitors. Then it became more ridiculous. She called to report that he was acting suspicious in his own front yard. Another time, she claimed he was running an unregistered business out of his garage. Each time the officers showed up, checked the situation, and left after finding nothing wrong. Eventually, they stopped taking her calls seriously. Karen, however, was not the type to accept defeat. If the real police would not handle her problem, then she would find another way. And unfortunately for Marcus, she had the perfect tool for the job. Living right under her roof, Karen sat in her pristine, over-decorated living room, tapping her nails against the armrest of her couch. The police had failed her. No matter how many times she called, no matter how many false reports she filed, they refused to do their jobs. That arrogant man was still there, still mowing his lawn, still parking his car in the driveway, still acting like he belonged in her neighborhood. It was unacceptable. She needed someone who would actually do something. Her eyes drifted toward the basement door. Kyle, her 32-year-old son, had lived in that basement for the past decade. Jobless and bitter, he had always dreamed of becoming a police officer, convinced it was his destiny. But reality had other plans. He had failed the entrance exam twice and flunked out of the police academy after barely making it in. It was not his fault, of course. It was all rigged against him, he insisted. The department just did not respect strong, dominant men like him. Karen indulged his delusions. She even bought him a second-hand security guard uniform after he claimed he would start his own private law enforcement business. That never happened, but Kyle still strutted around the house in the uniform, practicing his cop voice and spinning a fake badge she ordered online between his fingers. She pushed open the basement door and called his name. A few minutes later, Kyle emerged wearing a stretched-out tank top and basketball shorts, his hair a greasy mess. He plopped onto the couch, scratching his belly. "What?" Karen pursed her lips. "We need to talk about our problem next door," Kyle groaned. "You are still on that?" "Yes," she snapped. "And I need your help. The police will not do their jobs, so we are going to handle it ourselves." Kyle raised an eyebrow. How Karen leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You have always wanted to be a cop. Well, now is your chance to act like one." It took a second for the idea to settle in Kyle's mind, but once it did, his lips curled into a slow, smug grin. "You mean like arrest him?" "Exactly." Kyle laughed, shaking his head. "Mom, I do not think you realize how genius this is. If he thinks the police are coming for him, he will have to leave." Karen beamed. "That is the spirit." For the first time in months, Kyle had a purpose. He rushed to his room and pulled out his prized possessions, his fake badge, the cheap polyester security uniform, and a plastic holster with no actual weapon inside. He adjusted his belt in the mirror, puffed out his chest, and practiced his best authoritative glare. Karen clapped her hands together, giddy with excitement. "Tomorrow night, we make our move." Kyle smirked. Time to show that guy what real law enforcement looks like. Neither of them had any idea just how badly this plan was going to backfire. The evening air was still and quiet when the pounding came at Marcus's front door. Bang, bang, bang. Open up. This is the police. Kyle's voice was deep, trying far too hard to sound authoritative. Marcus, who had been watching a basketball game, sighed and muted the TV. He had been expecting Karen to try something ridiculous, but this was a new level of desperation. He opened the door to find Kyle standing there in an ill-fitting security uniform, a fake badge clipped to his belt, and an empty holster strapped around his waist. His stance was wide, chest puffed out like a bad action movie character. Behind him, Karen stood with her arms crossed, her smug expression practically radiating satisfaction. Kyle held up a crumpled piece of paper. "You are under arrest. Warrant for your detainment." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A warrant for what, exactly?" Kyle hesitated for a split second before blurting, "Illegal activity." Marcus had to fight the urge to laugh. He leaned against the doorframe, casually, crossing his arms. "Illegal activity? That is real specific." Kyle scowled. "Step outside, sir. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Karen finally spoke up, her voice dripping with condescension. "Oh, do not bother arguing, Marcus. You have been causing problems since the day you moved in. I knew this day would come." Marcus exhaled slowly, tilting his head as he studied Kyle's outfit. The badge was cheap and slightly crooked. His uniform had no patches, no department name, and was clearly sport. The holster was empty. It was embarrassing. "So, you are a cop, huh?" Marcus asked, playing along. Kyle straightened up. "That is right." "Which department?" Kyle blinked. The local one." "The local what?" Kyle's face twitched. "Police department." Obviously Marcus chuckled. "Right, and what is your badge number?" Kyle hesitated, his eyes darting toward Karen, who was now shifting uncomfortably. Marcus took a step forward. "Go ahead, recite it." Kyle stammered. I do not have to tell you that." "Oh, but you do." Marcus's voice hardened just a bit, though his expression remained calm. "Because if you are really an officer, you know that is standard procedure. So, I will ask again. What is your badge number?" Kyle swallowed hard. "Listen, man, you are making this way more difficult than it needs to be." Marcus smirked. "Am I?" The confidence in Kyle's eyes flickered. He was beginning to realize just how badly this was going. Karen, too, was shifting from smug satisfaction to growing unease, and then, before either of them could react, Marcus reached into his pocket. What he pulled out made both Kyle and Karen go pale. Marcus held up a real police badge, a gleaming official one. The kind that did not come from a shady online store, the kind that carried actual authority. Kyle's eyes widened as he stepped back instinctively. What is that?" Marcus flipped the badge open, revealing his credentials. "It is called a real police badge. You know, the kind given to actual law enforcement officers." Karen's mouth fell open. "That cannot be real." "Oh, it is real." Marcus stepped forward, his calm demeanor now carrying an unmistakable air of command. "And you know what else is real?" "The crime you just committed," Kyle stammered. "We were just trying to impersonating an officer," Marcus interrupted. "That is a felony. Attempted unlawful detainment, also illegal. You knocked on my door pretending to be law enforcement, tried to serve a fake warrant, and attempted to intimidate me into complying." He shook his head. "You just dug yourself a deep hole." Kyle was sweating now, his hands twitching at his sides. Wait, we can talk about this, man." "Oh, we will," Marcus said, "but not out here." Karen, still struggling to process the situation, suddenly snapped back to life. Now, hold on. You cannot do this. He is my son." He was just trying to help. Marcus turned toward her. "Karen, your son just tried to arrest a man on his own property with no real authority. That is not helping. That is a crime. And you encouraged him." Karen's face turned red. I was only trying to protect the neighborhood from what exactly?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. That was all the confirmation Marcus needed. He pulled out his phone. "I could call one of my officers to come pick you both up, but honestly, I think I would rather handle this myself." Kyle was shaking his head, hands raised slightly. "Come on, man, please. I did not mean." "Oh, you meant every word," Marcus said, his tone calm but firm. "And now you are going to face the consequences." He pulled out his handcuffs. Kyle let out a choked noise. Karen gasped. And in that moment, both of them realized this was not just some neighborhood dispute anymore. They had just messed with the wrong man. For the first time that night, Karen looked genuinely scared. Her usual smugness had disappeared as she watched Marcus dial his phone. "Yeah, I've got an active case of police impersonation," Marcus said casually into the receiver. "Attempted unlawful detainment. Send a unit to my address." Karen's face twisted with panic. "Now hold on, just a second. You cannot do this." Marcus glanced at her. "Oh, but I can." Kyle, meanwhile, was trembling. His tough guy act had fully crumbled. Look man, we can talk this out, right? No need to involve." The distant wail of sirens cut through the night air. Kyle's entire body jerked at the sound. "No, no, no." Then, in a flash of desperation, he did something incredibly stupid. He ran, spinning on his heel. Kyle took off down the driveway like a startled deer, arms pumping wildly. Unfortunately for him, running in loose dress shoes was not ideal. His foot caught the edge of the curb, sending him sprawling forward. He barely had time to get back up before the real officers arrived. 3 squad cars rolled in, blue and red, lights flashing as officers stepped out, weapons drawn. "Freeze. Hands where we can see them." Kyle, winded and desperate, threw his hands up immediately. I was just." One officer swiftly tackled him to the ground, pinning his arms behind his back as he let out a pathetic yelp. Karen screamed, "Stop, stop, he is just a boy." Marcus turned to her with a smirk. "Oh, I thought he was a police officer." Karen's eyes darted around wildly. "This is ridiculous. I was only trying to protect my neighborhood. He did not mean anything by it." One of the officers approached her. "Ma'am, we have reviewed your call history with dispatch. You have made multiple false police reports regarding your neighbor." Karen scoffed. "So what?" I was concerned. The officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "You lied to emergency services, attempted to have an innocent man removed from his home, and encouraged your son to impersonate an officer. That is conspiracy." Karen took a step back, shaking her head. "No, no, you cannot arrest me." I clicked. The handcuffs snapped onto her wrists. Marcus exhaled, shaking his head as Karen and Kyle were both hauled to their feet. Kyle, looking close to tears, muttered, "This is so unfair." Marcus chuckled, "Tell that to the judge." And with that, the officers led them away. Karen and Kyle had tried to intimidate Marcus into leaving. Instead, they were the ones being forced out, just not in the way they had planned. By the time the police cars pulled away, the entire neighborhood was awake. Windows were lit, curtains were pulled back, and a few curious residents had even stepped outside, whispering amongst themselves. "Did you see that?" One woman murmured. "She really sent her own son to pretend to be a cop." Another man shook his head in disbelief. "I knew she was crazy, but this." Marcus took a deep breath, glancing around. He had lived there only a short while, but most of these people had barely spoken to him now, though. Their eyes were not full of suspicion or annoyance. They were full of respect. Karen, the woman who had spent months trying to get him out of the neighborhood, was gone. And Marcus, he was not going anywhere. The next morning, things got even better. The homeowner association board, who had always turned a blind eye to Karen's antics, suddenly released an official statement. "Greater than we do not condone the actions of former homeowner association member Karen Williams. As of today, she has been permanently removed from our association, and any remaining influence she had over the community has been revoked." Marcus smirked as he read the letter. For months, Karen had made his life hell, convinced she could bully him into leaving. Now she had lost everything: her precious homeowner association status, her credibility, and most importantly, her freedom. Later that day, Marcus stepped outside to grab his mail. A few of his neighbors stood nearby, awkwardly watching him. Finally, one of them, a middle-aged man, cleared his throat. "Hey, sorry about all that." Marcus simply smiled. "No worries. Justice has a funny way of working itself out." And with that, he walked back into his home completely at peace.